What's up, nonprofit leaders? Let's talk for a moment about creating a sustainable and consistent donor base. All right, and let's talk about the importance of having a sustainable and consistent donor base. All too often within the nonprofit space, I see nonprofits riding the event roller coaster, right? And what I mean by that is that they're going from event to event, hoping that the funding from each event will carry them through to the next event, right? And I know because I've ridden this roller coaster, and it's an incredibly stressful roller coaster to ride, right? Excuse me. So what's happening there a lot of times is, say they've got a golf outing in August and they'll start fundraising in the spring, February, March, April, whatever it might be. And so they start fundraising in the spring, they start building up money, and the money piles up in the account, and hopefully there's still some money left over after the event that carries them through into next spring before they start fundraising again for the golf outing in August, and so on and so forth, right? But the whole time they get through the event and then they watch the account dwindle, 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 dwindle. And as the account dwindles, the stress rises, right? And so on and so forth. And being in this sort of event roller coaster type of fundraising mentality has a couple of effects on the organization and on the nonprofit leader, right? Or one on the organization, one on the nonprofit leader. First, from an organizational standpoint, there's no ability to plan for the future, right? So, for example, I can't hire staff today because I don't know if I'm going to have the funds in 6 months to keep them around, right? And so I'm constantly wondering, I don't know if I can pull the trigger on that. I don't know if I can pull the trigger on that, right? I don't know if we're going to have the money for it in 3, 4, 5, maybe even 1 month, whatever it might be, right? And then beyond that, it takes its toll on the nonprofit leader from a stress standpoint, right? Because the nonprofit leader is now watching the funds start to dwindle more and more and more, and they're becoming more and more worried. And then they have to gear up for a Herculean effort of fundraising again to get them through the event and pile up more money and hope that it makes them through, right? It's just this rough space to be in as a nonprofit leader. And so I'm going to talk for a moment about a few things that I hope help you conceptualize what it looks like to create a consistent donor base. Excuse me, I'm just getting over a cold. So here we go. I'll share my screen. First, I'm showing you the four-legged stool, okay? And the four-legged stool is just a visual I have to help you understand where funding comes from for most nonprofits, right? And then to help you understand a little bit more about each one of these legs and perhaps where you might want to focus more of your time if you're looking to create a sustainable and consistent donor base. Okay, so the four legs are service organizations and churches, right? A lot of people will go to their local Rotary or Kiwanis Club or local church for funding for their nonprofit. These are not bad places to look for funding by any means, but if you're looking to raise significant amounts of money, you don't want to hang your hat in these spaces, right? You don't want to spend all of your time trying to raise from these organizations. These organizations can be great when it comes to long-term, consistent fundraising, right? And they can really help you build into your monthly donor base as well, potentially, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a moment, but they're not somewhere that you want to really hang your hat on and spend a significant amount of your time fundraising in, unless you just have all the time in the world to fundraise. Grants is a space that can come with high rewards occasionally, but here's what I'll say about grants. Grants often come with so much red tape and so much effort, right? Sometimes it takes 2-3 days to secure and upload all the documents that you need to possibly get a grant, but more likely not get a grant. That grants just, from my perspective, aren't a great option for creating a sustainable donation base, right? They're a ton of work for possibly a reward, but probably not. And in addition to that, they're just becoming less reliable and less available, right? With cuts to government funding and all of that, it's just, there's a lot of uncertainty in the world of grants. And I think that uncertainty just really keeps them from being a really viable option for long-term sustainability. you might secure a grant for a couple $100,000 that's there for a couple of years, but if it disappears, you're in real trouble, right? So there's some other things you can use to sort of create a little bit more of a sustainable donor base. Another piece of this puzzle is businesses, right? And so a lot of times you'll see the nonprofit that's stuck in that event cycle. They're almost exclusively hanging their hat on business sponsorships for their organization, right? And so they're always looking for businesses to sponsor what they're doing, and that's not a bad thing necessarily. You can pull in some significant funding in this way, but again, when it comes to sustainability, I don't know if it's the best option. Where I've always hung my hat as a fundraiser has always been in the realm of individuals, right? Grassroots, person-to-person fundraising from people in my community, asking them to support the cause, right? This is going to be your easiest ask in terms of effort and time, and it's also going to likely be people who will become raving fans of your organization, right? And raving fans of you, right? Some of our best friends in the world have been individuals who have donated to our organization consistently over time. And so I'll wrap up with this as I talk about the four-legged stool. Over a decade in nonprofit work, I would say that my percentages roughly, if we look at where my percentages of funding came from, I would say that probably 5% came from service organizations and churches. Another 5% probably came from grants. Another maybe 10 to 15% came from businesses. And then well over half of the funding for the organizations that I led always came from individuals, right? Again, I think they are the highest juice for the least squeeze option here. And really a place that a lot of nonprofits are missing out on, right? It's easier, it's less awkward, I might say, to go to the service organizations and the grant-making organizations and ask for money, right? Or even to businesses, right? It's easier for me to say, hey, will your business give, as opposed to just approaching somebody directly and saying, hey, will you give to this organization? It's a little bit more of an awkward ask, but it comes with way more benefits in the long run for creating a sustainable donor base. Okay, and then I've got one more visual I want to show you as well. And this is really important in creating a sustainable donor base. You need balance between your recurring donations and your lump sum donations. And what I see here is often that a lot of nonprofits are hanging out in the lump sum space. And let me back up for a moment and explain each one of these. So you'll find with funding within any organization, there's two buckets that funding is sort of coming from, right? One is what I would call like a recurring bucket, and this is recurring monthly, sometimes quarterly donations. I'm not talking about your recurring yearly donations in this bucket, right? Again, recurring monthly, sometimes quarterly donations. And then lump sum is maybe your recurring yearly donations, also people who just give one time or randomly, anything like that. And what you see is a lot of nonprofits that have heavily secured lump sum donations, but are lagging behind in the recurring space, right? And so you're always going to see some level of instability within that nonprofit, right? Because lump sum donations can come sometimes, and sometimes they might not come. Sometimes they'll be huge. Sometimes they'll be non-existent at all, right? They're just a little bit more of a less predictable space, right? Now, your recurring monthly donations are where it's at, right? I had an old boss who explained it this way. And if you understand football, you'll get the reference here. But he would say that your recurring donations are like your run game. And then your lump sum donations are like your passing game, right? And so the run game is going to be what consistently gets you down the field, right? 3-4 yards, 3-4 yards, and into the end zone. And then occasionally you're going to throw a 30-yard pass, and it's going to be exciting and awesome. But anybody who knows football knows that that's not the way to live, right? You've got to make sure you've got a quality run game if you're going to set this team up, but this nonprofit up for sustainable, consistent success. And so let me talk about each of these sort of streams for a moment before I jump off this slide. So it's important to understand that a lot of times there's a little bit of a different donor in each space, right? And so the recurring donor or the potential recurring donor is often someone who is closer to the organization or closer to organizational leadership, right? They understand a few more of the nuances within the organization. They keep up with the happenings within the organization. And I'm not saying that a random person can't sign up recurring, because I've had that happen plenty of times as well. But generally speaking, it's somebody who's a little bit closer to the organization. And that makes it a almost a more personal ask, right? An ask where you're communicating with the person. Hey, this is a really important piece of this puzzle. You seem interested in our nonprofit. You've always been a great supporter and encouraging to me, whatever it might be. You're essentially sort of letting them know how important they are and inviting them to really play a part of the backbone of your organization, right? And that's really important, right? I think it's good for people to understand just how important their role is within the organization, right? And so recurring, again, can be a little bit more of an intimate, a person who has intimate knowledge of you and your organization. That can also make it a little bit more of an awkward ask, right? It's like, again, it's almost easier to ask a stranger to give than to ask, a good friend. And so, again, I think that's why some folks avoid this recurring space, because it just feels a little bit less. It feels a little more awkward, right? Like a little bit more is on the line relationally whenever you make that ask. But with that said, again, it can be an incredibly beautiful space. Some of our best friends have been people who supported us for years on a recurring basis within our organizations, right? And they know we love them. They love us. They're rooting for us and everything that we do, and they want to be committed on that level, which is really, really awesome. And if you don't have those people right now, which I'm sure you do, you have more than you think, you've got to constantly be thinking about, okay, how do we create those people within our organization? And I have other videos on sort of creating that, but just be thinking about those things. And then from a lump sum standpoint, a lot of times you'll get some people that just want to write a check for the organization, right? Or maybe they're a business owner who just wants to write a check out of their business for a donation and move on, and that's totally fine, right? Sometimes, just like I said, a little bit of a different mentality there out of each donor, and these are generalities. It doesn't apply across the board. But anyways, a couple more things I want to say about the recurring donations. Board members should be monthly donors in my mind, right? Board members should be people who understand what's most important for your organization, and they should be the early adopters, right? They should be the people that are the most passionate and who are going to jump in on that level, right? And we all know that money is the thing that makes the whole thing go, right? No money, no mission, you're in trouble. And then within the realm of money, the most important thing is that consistency, right? And so conveying to board members that, hey, if there's one thing that's really important in this organization, it's recurring donors. Want you guys to jump in on that level. That's really important, right? They're doing what's most important for the organization, and they're also creating momentum for others, right? I'm going to talk in a moment about sharing victories, and board members can really help you sort of pump up that recurring giving quickly, so that you can say, hey, we just had a great victory here. Let's keep up the momentum. And the community can see that other people are willing to invest in this organization on a recurring basis, which is really important in building recurring funding. And then lastly, excuse me, in the recurring funding space, I've seen a lot of gimmicks here. It'll be like, give $21 a month because it's 2021, I don't think those are necessarily bad things, but I'll say this, and I'll say it till my hair falls out, which is happening at a rapid pace. There's nothing better than a just true, humble, honest, transparent ask to receive recurring funding, to receive any funding of any sort, right? Just being direct with people. You don't have to gimmick it up. You don't have to come up with some really creative, cool, catchy way to go about it. Just asking people to contribute in that way is really, really important. So I think that's all I have to say on these two. Lump sum. Well, yeah, one more thing on lump sum. So these grow over time, right? It took me over 4 years to receive my first $10,000 donation. 3 years after that, in year 7, I had multiple 6-figure donations, right? So it can explode at any time, and it just takes time, right? Just continue to be consistent in doing the right things in both of these realms, and they'll both build over time. But you got to make sure that you're creating opportunities for people to give in both realms. You've got to make sure you're getting this information out there, right? Mentioning both opportunities regularly, right? And it doesn't always have to be an ask. I was talking about sharing victories a little bit earlier in the video. Here's a great way to go about not asking people, but also pointing their mind toward your need for funding, right? It might be an email or a social media post that says, we just reached $3,000 a month in recurring giving. Woohoo. Let's celebrate. Something like that. That shows people multiple things. One, it just helps them build trust in your organization, right? Hey, there are people in this community that are willing to get behind this organization on a recurring basis. That says a lot, right? That says a lot about how people trust your organization. And so if I'm somebody who's observing that, I can say, well, maybe I can trust this organization as well. But it also puts the need for funding out in front of people without the ask, right? As a fundraiser, you'll burn people out if you're constantly asking. They'll just start to say, man, that organization's always asking for money. So you've got to find creative ways to get the need out there without always asking, and sharing victories is a great way to do that. Okay, I'm going to bring you back to me to wrap it up with a few additional thoughts. But first is just donor care, right? It's really important to care for your donors. I talk about in other videos the idea of sharing and storytelling, right? And how powerful that is for your organization. Story sells, right? At the end of the day, that's how you bring potential new donors into your organization. But you can't forget, once they become donors, you can't forget to continue telling them the story, right? You can't forget to continue showing them the reason why they're donating to your organization, right? And it doesn't have to, you don't have to be their best friend. You don't have to have them on speed dial. You don't have to be constantly texting them, or anything like that. But at a minimum, I would say that they need some sort of communication from your organization, whether it be through email or social media, whatever it might be, on a monthly basis, right? Put yourself in front of them on a monthly basis, or your organization in front of them on a monthly basis. Continue to share that story and help them, again, not feel like, well, I just became a donor and they completely forgot about me, right? No. Again, a part of this being a partnership is just keeping them in the loop, right? If somebody invested in your business and then you said, hey, I'm going to completely forget about you and never keep you updated on what's going on, it's like, okay, this wasn't really a partnership, right? So it's really important to continue doing that. And this can be a lot of work, right? But again, figuring out what's most important for your organization. Storytelling is one of the most important things for any nonprofit organization. You've got to continue to do it consistently. If you don't have the time, make sure you're delegating it. Do it. And you all know this if you watched any of my other videos as well. Transparency is honesty, transparency, vulnerability. All of those things are the best tools you have when it comes to storytelling. And when it comes to fundraising, I mean transparency in terms of becoming clear on your numbers and then sharing them with others, right? How much do you need? Why do you need it? And then share that with the community consistently, right? And if the truth of the matter is like, hey, we don't have enough, then let people know that, right? Hey, we don't have enough to do this, this, and this. This is what we're trying to accomplish. A lot of nonprofit leaders want to try and paint a prettier picture than what's happening. And don't just resist that. Don't do that. People will not give if you don't show them the full story and say, hey, here's what's going on. Here's where we're trying to get. This is the amount of money that we need. So just be transparent. And even if that number sounds huge, like that's okay. We started out with Farming with Friends, shooting toward raising $500,000. And whenever I started out with that, I was like, man, this is crazy. I had only raised $150,000 a year up to that point. And we blew past that goal in under a year. And so anyways, I just say that to say, like, be transparent, show them the full goal, and let them know everything that's going into that. It can be really effective. You really want to just utilize transparency and vulnerability and honesty with all of your donors, right? And potential donors. That's how you create a community of trust and people who really rally behind what you're doing as an organization. And then lastly, I'll wrap up with this. Ask, right? It's a numbers game. At the end of the day, you want consistent donations, you better be asking consistently, right? That's all there is to it. consistency and sustainability a lot of times comes down to the number of asks that you're making, right? And here's the deal. I can think of 10 people that I would give to tomorrow if they just asked, right? There are a lot of people out there just waiting. Well, they're not like sitting, twiddling their thumbs waiting for you to ask them, but they're totally open to giving if you just ask, right? So just get out there, put yourself out there. I know it's uncomfortable at times, but what you're doing is totally worth it, right? It's an incredible mission. Chase after that thing. Be unapologetic about it. Be kind, be loving, all of that, but go after it with your whole heart. All right, I hope that helps. Take care.